Hi, I'm Colette Watson, and this is Free Press Live, brought to you by Free Press, a nonprofit, nonpartisan media reform advocacy organization. Free Press Live is your weekly source for updates and live discussion of what's happening in the world of communications rights. Learn more about our work at freepress.net. In the next half hour, we're going to be discussing President Biden's $2 trillion plan for improving the nation's infrastructure. The package is looking to address the nation's media and technology challenges, from the digital divide to the local news crisis, potentially. Free Press co-CEO Craig Aaron is here to talk about the possibilities for journalism plus exciting proposals for modernizing broadband and how Comcast and friends will surely try to stop it. But first, the headlines. This weekend, an Israeli airstrike destroyed a high-rise building in Gaza City that housed offices of the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, and other media outlets, as well as apartments and businesses. The AP writes, "The Israeli government says the building contained Hamas military intelligence assets. We have called on the Israeli government to put forward the evidence." In other news, Amazon announced it is indefinitely halting the use of its facial recognition software, Rekognition, by law enforcement. The moratorium, originally set to expire in June, was instituted last year amid protests sparked by the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. According to Politico, Amazon wrote in a blog last year, "We hope this one-year moratorium might give Congress enough time to implement appropriate rules." And speaking on the matter, Maisha Hayes, campaign strategies director at Media Justice, issued the following statement. Amazon's Rekognition software has enabled the policing of Black and Brown people, feeding the United States mass incarceration and mass deportation machines. And thousands stood up against expansion of Amazon's tactics to surveil and imprison our communities. Extending the moratorium on the further sale of Rekognition to law enforcement, announced this week, is not enough for those targeted before the moratorium or for our activists, family members, and neighbors whose right to exist and move freely in public space remains threatened every day Amazon refuses to enforce a permanent ban. Amazon must make a commitment to prevent any future sale of their surveillance tech, that is, to police and federal agencies. Anything less is unacceptable. And you can learn more at MediaJustice.org. In a report from Ars Technica, Verizon and other internet service providers are preventing some low-income customers from getting the new $50 per month government subsidy unless they switch to different plans that are sometimes more expensive. That subsidy is the emergency broadband plan, which we discussed here on Free Press Live last week. Over 825 internet service provider companies nationwide are selling plans eligible for the new subsidies that the U.S. government made available for those who have low incomes or lost income during the pandemic. Verizon stands out, however, among ISPs in its use of the subsidy to upsell customers to pricier plans. "This is tremendously disappointing," said Dana Floberg, policy manager for consumer advocacy, policy manager here at Free Press. ISPs could just accept the $50 emergency broadband benefit for all their plans and tiers. The money's just as good. Forcing people to switch plans in order to use the benefit they legally qualify for is at best manipulative. And you can learn more about our work on the emergency broadband benefit and all of our work toward a more just internet, media, and technology system at freepress.net. So today we are going to talk about our work on broadband and our vision of a world in which the digital divide has been closed and broadband is accessible and fair to all. I'm going to welcome our guest for today, Craig Aaron, who has led Free Press and Free Press Action since 2011. For more than 15 years, he's been a leader in major campaigns at Free Press to safeguard net neutrality, stop media consolidation, oppose unchecked surveillance, defend public media, and sustain quality journalism. It's a pleasure to have you here today, Craig. How are you?
I'm great. It's always good to be here, and I'm glad to be back.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to jump right into it. So President Biden has unveiled a $2 trillion infrastructure plan. And for most folks, we think of infrastructure as roads, bridges, sewer treatment plants, things of that nature. But in 2021, I believe, we here at Free Press and so many others are saying that, of course, broadband is fundamental to our daily lives and certainly part of the infrastructure of our communities. And so broadband is a part of that infrastructure bill. How excited should folks be about that, particularly about 100 billion being dedicated to modernization of our broadband here?
I think people should be very excited. I think that you said it, $100 billion. This is a real investment, if it can go from the plan into reality, in that quest to end the digital divide once and for all, which is the kind of goal this administration should have. How do we actually end the digital divide by the end of President Biden's term? This would be a huge step in that direction. And I think you raise exactly the right point, which is we do need to be thinking about broadband as essential infrastructure. You know, one of the interesting ways this debate has changed in just the past 2 years and really spurred by the pandemic is like that's not actually being debated anymore. The idea that broadband is part of essential infrastructure, that broadband is a necessary part of everybody's lives, there's no argument against that, even though some of these companies and the people fronting for them have argued that in years past. That debate is closed. Broadband is essential infrastructure. It needs to be part of any infrastructure bill. And I'm very encouraged at how the new administration has prioritized it, up to and including, you know, broadband being a really big part of the president's speech before Congress a few weeks ago. Singling out Vice President Harris with the responsibility to lead this effort. I think these are all very, very encouraging signs that this new administration takes broadband seriously and that they are going to prioritize it in this process with Congress over the next few months to try to pass a massive infrastructure package. We need it. We need a broad definition of infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure is people ultimately. How are we going to help people? An investment in broadband like this could go a long way if we get those details right.
Absolutely. It's always in the details, right? I think, you know, for many people who may be watching, broadband particularly came into sharp view during the lockdown, the pandemic that we're all still experiencing, when there were photos that went viral of kids doing homework in restaurant parking lots, or other folks trying to get access to high-speed internet in order to continue to do life, but virtually, as was required by the public health emergency. So I know that a lot of folks that have maybe thought more about broadband this year, but it's still an issue that so many of us think of in terms of, do I have a connection or not? And I think, like you said, it's in the details. There's so much to it. What are you and other advocates looking for in this infrastructure plan, or with regard to Biden's plan for broadband? What needs to be prioritized in those details?
So I would highlight a couple of things. I mean, I think number one, top of the list, unquestionably, is the issue of affordability. How much is it going to cost, and how are we helping people who otherwise couldn't afford that broadband connection? There's a number of ways at this, but this is the key. The reason we have a digital divide in this country still isn't because we haven't run the wires to almost everywhere. The wires are in the ground. We could have better wires. We should invest in future-proof networks. Those are important issues. The number one barrier to people getting connected is that the price is just too damn high. And when people are looking at how are they going to pay their monthly bills, how are they going to keep their families fed, the prohibitively high price of broadband becomes a barrier to the kind of connectivity that is necessary to go to school, to do your job, to stay connected with your friends and family who you're otherwise unable to see in this country or around the world. These are the things we need to be paying attention to. And the priority has to be bringing that price down. And that's going to be a combination of things. One of the things we need to look at, and where we have to get the details right, are subsidies. How are we going to help those who otherwise can't afford it? How are we going to make it easy for them to access broadband? We talked about in the opening, these emergency broadband benefit. That's a very good program. I'm glad to see it started, but we can already see the phone companies making it hard for people, trying to upsell them. We need simple plans that are available to everybody, and we need to make sure there's someone to enforce how they're being distributed. We also need to make it easier for people to access these programs. We don't need a whole bunch of means testing and hoops and other things to run through. The priority is getting everyone connected, keeping them connected. I think the other area we need to pay attention to is just being able to study, what are people paying for broadband? This is a mystery that the government should have the answers to. And that means forcing these companies to share real data about who has access, who doesn't, what they're charging. That's going to be important. And then lastly, competition and choice. People benefit when they have multiple ways to get online, where there are alternatives, whether that's coming from their municipality, whether that's coming from other forms of competition that ensure that they can get online, go wherever they want, do whatever they want without their ISPs interfering, but also at a price they can afford. This type of proposal could be the baseline for that kind of transformative change where we finally treat broadband as the necessity it is, rather than a luxury for those who can afford it. That is the kind of shift we need to make. I think this program could be a step in the right direction. I'm very encouraged by the early signals and the things with the president acknowledging the price is too high, acknowledging the kind of barriers people face. That's the kind of change we need to see. And it is going to be a political fight, but it's one that finally, after many, many years, does seem to be moving in the right direction.
Yes, thank you, Craig. And for folks who may just be tuning in, you're watching Free Press Live, your weekly source for news at the intersection of media, technology, and communications rights. We have with us today the co-CEO of Free Press, Craig Aaron. I'm Colette Watson, and we're talking about President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan that was unveiled this spring, which includes $100 billion dedicated to broadband. Craig, tell us about how this proposal or these proposals would potentially impact the racial dynamics of the digital divide.
Well, I think this is really important because our research has shown, regardless of income, that there are racial aspects to the digital divide. In other words, that even when you control for income levels and certainly, poverty and things like that have their own racial impacts and racial dynamics that we can talk about. But even when you control for those, you still see lower adoption rates among people of color, among Black folks, Latinx folks. And this is a public policy problem that needs to be addressed. Our analysis suggests, again, that one of the big reasons for this has to do with, again, the price being too high and how it intersects with things like generational wealth, who owns property, what are the kind of things that are contained in credit checks, the kind of redlining or quasi-redlining types of activities that ISPs have contributed to and participated in historically and currently, the kind of hoops that are thrown up, the kind of jobs that are made available to folks. It's all intertwined. But if you want to solve this problem, I think the best thing you can do is make broadband more affordable and remove some of the kind of hoops and checks and shutdowns and takedowns that disproportionately are targeted at and affect people of color based on their zip codes and based on other historically based, frankly, racist corporate policies that have been part of this industry. That is inevitably a factor in how broadband is distributed, where it's available, where there's competition, where there's choice actually available trying to connect, and where the lines have even been extended to whose neighborhoods. So these are all things that public policy can help address by encouraging competition, by encouraging investment in that infrastructure, and most importantly, by lowering the price to connect and putting the kind of regulatory and political pressure on the ISPs to change how they're doing business and make sure that everyone can get and stay connected, and removing the kind of barriers that have historically been erected. I think that's what we need. And that's why it's going to have to be a combination of things. This kind of public investment in broadband infrastructure to say, we're not going to have economic recovery without investing in broadband. We're not going to be able to move this country really into that global leader kind of position if everybody's not connected. That's important. Equally important is, are we actually putting things in place to make sure that these companies can be held accountable? They invest billions of dollars in the influence game in Washington to try to evade accountability. This is a moment where we have to say, we can't stand for that any longer. We need to restore that accountability. We need to appoint people to the FCC willing to use the authority of that agency. And we need to restore the authority of that agency to make sure they can hold these companies accountable toward the kind of societal goals that are represented in this infrastructure proposal: getting everybody connected, creating better jobs, a more equitable distribution of resources. This broadband work ties in with all of that. And I think that is the key to closing the digital divide as a whole. But again, paying special attention to the fact that there is a racial dynamic to the digital divide, and we can't ignore that. It doesn't do us any good to have a purely, colorblind approach that doesn't say we actually need to investigate why this is happening and come up with policy solutions to address it. And those are going to be broad-based. They involve, broader economic recovery, broader kinds of opportunity. But this broadband aspect is a key piece of that, because if you don't have that connection, you're never going to be able to participate.
Yes, broadband is the key to basic participation in society. So I do want to thank the folks who are watching. This is Free Press Live, your weekly news and updates from the world of communications rights. And I want to invite folks to let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We're here with Craig Aaron, co-CEO of Free Press, discussing the new $2 trillion infrastructure plan that has been unveiled by President Joe Biden and what that plan holds for broadband and media. Please do let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and any questions that you might have for our resident expert here today, Craig Aaron. I think you made some excellent points there, Craig, regarding the racial dynamics of the digital divide and the historical roots of the digital divide. I think when you talk about corporate accountability, which is so key, we do have to look back into the origins of how our media system has come together and how our broadband system and availability have rolled out in this country. When you look at things like digital redlining, in which communities are connected, I definitely appreciate that that attention to historical detail. And I think when we talk about corporate accountability historically and now, which we do a lot of in our project Media 2070, the media reparations project here at Free Press, where we are looking at the history of media and technology harm against Black communities. But in a broader sense, when we're looking at Black and Indigenous and other communities of color, there definitely is a disproportionate impact when we talk about the ways that these companies not only have made, for instance, broadband fiber available, but many of the other policies that they have. You mentioned credit reports and other ways that consumers are negatively impacted. These do show up disproportionately for folks of color and those living on low incomes. So when we talk about what's happening with this infrastructure plan, what are those companies going to do to try to evade that accountability? And what are some of the other threats to, this push to modernize and make more accessible our technology?
Well, I think that we know they want the money. So this is an interesting thing about a big infrastructure bill that could spend trillions of dollars. Big companies are like, oh, you want to give us some money? We'd be happy to take that. Thank you very much. They don't want any strings attached. And I think that's the political fight that in some ways that we have ahead of us is, how are we ensuring that those companies who are receiving this money in order to make sure that people are connected, and, until we can build lots of alternative infrastructure, like we want to ensure that people are connected. And if that means they have to get the internet from Comcast or Verizon, we want to make sure they get that internet connection. But we don't want it to be with no accountability. So the real key here, I think, is in ensuring the kind of accountability measures that people are being, offered top tier kinds of service, that we aren't shunting people who maybe have lower incomes into sort of the schminternet, barely connected, barely able to access the benefits. Folks need to be able to access high-speed internet that will actually allow them to go to school, do their jobs, et cetera. We also need to ensure that, things like we talked about in the headlines, so that people aren't being ripped off just to be able to take advantage of these programs. And we need to look at, if we're going to make these kind of benefits permanent, which I would support. I think we do want these benefits to be permanent, not just in an emergency context, that the companies that provide internet service are making their own sets of obligations to ensure that this is very available, that it's not easy to shut people off and cut them off, that they don't have to jump through endless hoops just to get a connection for their kids or to maintain a connection if someone happens to lose their job. We need to make this much easier because society as a whole benefits when everybody gets connected. So those are some of the things that I would be paying attention to, in addition to this parallel fight that we're going to be having at the same time around what is the authority that a regulatory agency like the Federal Communications Commission is going to have to hold these companies accountable. We need to empower the FCC to actually watch these companies and make sure they're saying what they're doing, what they say they're going to do, because they're going to go tell Congress all day long, oh, we can't wait to connect everybody. And they're going to produce these, beautiful and amazingly diverse ads that talk about how great they've been during the pandemic. But the proof is actually going to be in what are people paying and how hard are you making it for them to actually access these services. And that's what our policymakers need to be paying attention to, so that when we talk about spending $100 billion on broadband, it is actually getting to those who need it most. And it is actually building the kind of future-proof system that's going to ensure that the entire country benefits from this kind of investment, not just the cable company or the phone company.
Absolutely. Future-proof. I like that. Craig, I want to ask you a question that actually one of our viewers has asked, and thank you all for tuning in to join us today on Free Press Live. I'm Colette Watson here with co-CEO of Free Press, Craig Aaron, discussing the new infrastructure plan that the Biden administration has unveiled, which includes dedicated funding for broadband. Olivia Marie asks, would it be possible to direct a specific amount of this funding to publicly and community-owned utilities that offer broadband services? There's some built-in accountability in those models. Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Craig.
No, that's great. I think that's a great question. And I do think this is part of the debate. I think that a good sign is that the Biden administration is already acknowledging the importance of these networks. And what we need is choice. We need to make sure that broadband's available everywhere, and that is going to include municipal community efforts to ensure that broadband, to fill in the gaps where these other companies don't serve, or to provide competition to these companies in ways that force them to improve their service and also offer alternatives. So I think the key here is that, one, ensuring that these benefits extend to all kinds of different providers, recognizing that the business model of a smaller community provider may look different than, if you're serving, 600 people in Plainfield, Massachusetts with your municipal broadband network. That's a different business model than what Comcast has to offer. And there may need to be slightly different requirements. But the bottom line is any benefits we extend through something like an infrastructure bill need to emphasize supporting these kinds of community and municipal efforts. And furthermore, I would argue, need to ensure that the barriers to pursuing those efforts are removed. Because we do still live in a country where I think 18 or 19 states have thrown up nearly insurmountable barriers to communities building their own networks, to investing in alternative forms of infrastructure. And we need to get rid of that. And we need to ensure that those benefits are broadly available so that we can have the kind of competition and choice that will only benefit the end user. So I absolutely think that must be part of this package, and that there are other things we need to do alongside that to ensure that these alternatives can actually succeed and thrive. It won't be the answer everywhere. So we need to hold these companies accountable too, but it absolutely has to be part of the picture.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you, Craig. We have another question coming in from Carrie Biggs Adams, who I believe is tuning in from San Francisco. And Carrie says, will this funding help improve the contour maps? I'm trying to find service in a new home, and the systems for helping me have not been great.
Such a great question. Hi, Carrie. I'm so glad you're here. Good to see you. Carrie herself, a tremendous media justice advocate on so many fronts. Yes, broadband data has to be a huge part of this. The fact is, it's unbelievable that we're in this year and we still don't know truly where broadband's available. And a lot of research done by my colleague Derek Turner has just shown just how inadequate the FCC's maps are to identifying where the broadband gaps are, and even where we're spending the money to fill it in. I mean, we did a whole expose showing that, the Pai administration was funding golf courses and places where people didn't even live. So I think broadband data unquestionably needs to be a big part of this so that people can actually make informed choices, and so that we can actually figure out where are the real gaps that we need to identify so that people can actually understand what benefits are there. I think that's going to be something ultimately that is going to have to be done by the Federal Communications Commission, though I think a bill like this could instruct them to improve mapping in ways that would be very useful. And again, forcing these companies as a condition of getting this kind of public support in their direction to actually provide the data that has been missing.
Thank you, Craig. And thank you, Carrie, for tuning in and for being such a dedicated advocate. We have plenty of comments rolling in. Unfortunately, we're coming to the close of today's live episode, but you can keep the conversation going in the comments here on Facebook. If you're tuning in on YouTube, you can do the same there. We really appreciate it. And you can sign up to receive regular updates from Free Press and even take action on these issues at freepress.net. I will share one comment that came in from Jason, watching from Canada. Not only broadband, but all infrastructure and essential industries should be nationalized, and or all tax loopholes, as well as international tax havens, should be closed. So thank you for that perspective, Jason, and for tuning in. We know that there are many, many perspectives on what the future should look like, but we all know that things have to change. And that is what Free Press is all about, is realizing a more just media and technology system. So we ask you to please join us every Wednesday here on Free Press Live, where we'll give you news and updates from the world of communications advocacy here at Free Press and all of our many allies. Craig, are there any other points that you wanted to share with folks just about this infrastructure plan and what's exciting and possible?
Well, I would just say stay ready, because we are going to have a political fight about this. The rollout is happening now. The details aren't all filled in. We have an opportunity to influence those details. We're going to be doing that at Free Press, and we're going to need people's help when it really gets down to fighting this out with big telecom companies. George noted in the comments that we have to really make sure accountability is part of any barriers that are being removed, any money that's being spent. And I couldn't agree more. So there is going to be a fight to make sure that the details are right here, that the implementation is right. Very encouraging signs that this administration is willing to fight for things. And it's going to be really important that people show up in this debate to make sure we're getting the kind of investment in infrastructure that actually goes to help people. Help workers, help consumers, help all of us actually, benefit from these technologies. And that is a fight that's coming this summer. So I hope we can count on everybody watching to join in that, and definitely sign up for freepress.net, because we will be sure to alert you when that fight is happening.
That's right. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of the possibilities in the world of journalism. Speaking of workers, there's a lot happening in the world of journalism and labor, as well as just the possibilities in this infrastructure plan or in the federal government in general regarding infusing and reviving local news. But of course, we're out of time today. So Craig,
we'll come back and have that conversation.
Okay. I was hoping I could get you to commit to that on camera. No, Craig is always so eager and willing to join us here on Free Press Live, and I really appreciate it, Craig. So for the folks watching, make sure you stay tuned at Free Press on Facebook for when that journalism-focused episode comes up, and we'll let you know what's possible right now, whether in the infrastructure plan or other legislation that could revive local news. Craig, thank you so much for being with us on Free Press Live this week. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you'd like for Free Press Live to keep going, do us a favor. 2 things. Please click like and share right now to share the episode to your timeline, and encourage your friends and colleagues and fellow activists to join the conversation in the comments. And please also consider donating to Free Press. We don't accept any funding from corporations or governments. We're completely independent in that way. And so we appreciate every dollar of support. And you can do that now at the link in the comments, freepress.net/donate. Tune in every Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on Facebook and YouTube for Free Press Live. And we'll see you next week.